A very warm welcome to Close and Bell West Africa. I'm Esther Awuni. We're still coming to you live from the venue of the World Pension Summit Africa Special here at the Transcorp Hilton Hotel in Abuja, Nigeria's Federal Capital Territory. We've been discussing emerging trends in Africa's pension space, looking at new innovations and how African economies or how African governments are developing their individual pension system, which is going to go right into our conversations for today. Joining me for this discussion is Eggink. He's the chairman, World Pension Summit, and also Ibrahim Muhanna. He's the managing director, Muhanna and Company, and chairman, Board of Trustees, Muhanna Foundation. Thank you, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today. Eric, let me start with you. Let's talk about emerging trends that we're seeing in Africa's pension space. So much has been said. A couple of success stories here and there, including Nigeria. But we know there's still some challenges. We know that there's still a long way to go. But would you say that at the pace that we are now, in terms of building a good foundation, how would you assess that?
Well, I think that 14 years ago, when PENCOM was starting with a new pension regulation, I think the basis was laid for a very firm and stable pension system. And if you look at the future now, you can see that we're making a new step to the informal sector, which is very, very important, because Nigeria has about 7 million people who are enrolling for this pension system. But we should elaborate much, much more, much faster to create more awareness and also new contributors to the system.
Ibrahim, let me come to you. What fascinates you the most in terms as Africa begins to develop its pension system?
I mean, everybody that I have met in the past years in Africa, I feel they are like a sponge. They want to learn. And like Eric earlier said before, when we were before being live, that Africans are learning by the mistakes or the experience of the West, since systems in the West have been in existence for 70, 80 years. And there is no reason on earth that you make the same mistakes. Things that are young, you can adjust it quickly, easier. And sometimes there are advantages of countries with dictatorships. And of course there are disadvantages otherwise, but the advantage is if you are able to reach the ear of the policymakers, you can do the reform nicely, and it can go faster. In a nice democracy, sometimes it takes forever to get the reform done. So I think Africa has a lot. I mean, it's not fair to say Africa, because Africa is a whole continent. What's happening in Rwanda is by far different than what's happening in Libya, and both are Africa. So I think we talk about Africa in a very general way, but I can say there's a lot to be done, and it's ready for us.
Okay, Eric, let me come to you. Ibrahim has talked about so much more that we need to do. Could you just point to some of those things you think that we could also do, maybe in addition to what we're doing?
Yeah, well, what we say is Africa has a lot of benefits. Not only you have a lot of young people who are still able to build up their pension provision for their old age. I think the average age in Nigeria is 35 or something. So you still have a lot of time to build up the system and to create a huge pot of money for the people who are older in 30 years or so. So that's one of the benefits. Another benefit is that you have the technology, which is really, really fast growing at the moment, which can help out to reach out to many more people than you are doing now. This morning I gave in my speech the example that in the last 2 years the use of mobile phones, and I should be specific with that because the smartphones doubled in 2 years in Africa as a whole. So now we have a little bit more than 1 billion people using a mobile phone, of which 35%, 40% is smartphone. So you can do a lot on the smartphone. So people can do payments, they can do insurance, they can do any money transaction that they want, and they can have their pension in their pocket. So I think with that appealing feeling, Africa has really much to go for.
Now, Ibrahim, let me come to you. There are a number of issues that will be discussed at this year's summit. Many of them center apart from innovation. There's also talk about how to widen the net, especially for micro pensions, strengthening social security systems. But for you, what key outcomes would you like to see? What key focus would you like to see come to the fore here? Is it micro pensions? Is it trust? Is it getting policymakers to be more engaged or perhaps more sincere with the private sector?
It's interesting that your question indirectly follows Eric's remarks about the use of mobile phone, but he used the word can. They can do this, they can do that. Whether they will, that's a different story. And that takes really,
about that.
Yeah. Certainly they can.
A political will?
No, the education will.
Okay.
Yes, they do have smartphones, but they are on Twitter, not even Twitter, they are on Facebook or WhatsApp. So that before really expecting them to use the smartphone on a proper tool for their pension, do they appreciate savings? Do they know? We financed a study among children to really see about the concept of savings. Before you understand savings, you have to understand expenditure. You should document how you spend your allowance. So we took children who are under 5, and 5 to 15, and over 15 to 25. And we asked them whether they take their weekly allowance or monthly allowance from their parent. How do you spend your allowance? Almost nobody knows. So we created a tool on a smartphone whereby they say, okay, we spend so much on burger, movies, transportation, and then you can benchmark it and you can say, wait a minute, what's your target saving percent to save 10% of your allowance? And what do you want to do with that saving? You educate children, and then you realize, okay, now we have a population that understand what is saving all about, what is the power of interest. So really, the tools that Eric was talking about are impressive, but you want to know what's happening.
In terms of, is there an impact, obviously?
I can add something to it. I was in a discussion this morning and somebody said, well, the word pensions is so old school because it doesn't appeal to younger people. It should be a postponed salary. That's much more appealing for you than a pension, because pension has to do with old people and things like that. So it's not appealing. It's not sexy enough. So maybe you should create a new word, a new concept about how to create a pot of money for a later position in your life.
That's an interesting concept. So basically, you think that there isn't enough financial awareness on the concept of savings. Do you think this is widespread on the African continent?
Yes, because the thing is, the main employers in Africa before has been governments. And somebody earlier said, the minister from Uganda was mentioning that employees of governments were also foreigners. So foreigners at that time, because of the colonial control, had foreign employees. To buy their loyalty, they provided benefits. And that benefit stayed with them, and then it was given to the local when the local became in. So the government were buying people, and because of the government controlled their salaries, the risk of manipulation of pension and benefit was not very large. So governments were able to absorb it. Then economy have changed. Governments start cutting down on hiring because they are allowing more to the private sector. So nowadays, the percentage of people on retirement compared to the percentage of people on the payroll became higher. So the government saying, oh, we are paying so much pension, but they shouldn't have been surprised. The numbers are there. And it's going to be reducing if they are cutting down on the sales force, on the workforce, the civil service, ultimately it's going to disappear. The only thing that worries me is the military, because the military pensions are very generous in all Africa, in many countries in the world, and if you don't pay their pension, they don't go on strike, they come to you with their machine guns. So the pension of the military, which is not being addressed at all, is a very serious issue, and governments really should address that.
That's an interesting point, because I haven't heard that. I'm actually hearing that for the first time at this summit. But what do you think about that?
Well, there are civil servants, there are military, there are many people who can really go out in the streets or with or without a machine. I think the impact of Social Security and being there as a governmental organization to provide money for people who need it is key. Is really very important. Either you're working in the street, you're working as a military. I think you have a promise you made a promise and you have to keep the promise, and that's the trust you have to build upon. And if you don't have that kind of trust, you're out of business as a governmental organization. You can stop, you can close your shop. Another point is that if you look at what I just said about the concept of the word of the pensions, it's also, if you look at the practice, for example, in Singapore, you save this kind of money. It's a huge pot of money if you do it well for an older age. But it's not only to live upon. You can also say, what they do in Singapore, you can pay the mortgage on your house, or you can use it for healthcare. So you are entitled to pick 2 or 3 areas where you can spend it on. You can't buy your TV from that kind of money, because that's not meant the money for. So housing, healthcare and pensions, that's where the money should go. And that's an interesting concept as well.
Is this something you suggested to, for instance,
if
the
you
Nigerian?
can say, well, this pot of money is yours, and in 30 years you can finance your house with it. So you go for a mortgage, which is also a large pot of money, and then you say, okay, after 30 years you can pay off your mortgage.
That's an interesting point you make. You wanted to add something?
It's interesting that I go back to the concept of education. The education system is really worldwide, not in Africa, is not futuristic. We have no clue how the future will look like 50 years from today. The people who are now 25, their needs when they are 65 is completely different than my needs 3 years from today. I'm 62. So their needs are completely different. So here I'm lecturing them what to do. It's enough to say that nobody whatsoever, I mean, if I knew that the PC, that the first laptop for me is going to be completely different today, I would have saved it now, it would be in my museum. But laptops have changed, everything is changing. So needs of people is completely different. You have people living all over the world. People at one stage used to live in their villages, and they became a little mobile.
Sure.
So.
And it's true what you say. I mean, if you look at the concept of driving a car, I don't know what is it in Nigeria, but in the Netherlands and in Western Europe, you see that my children, they share cars with their friends. They buy one car, and 10 friends, they take the car and they share the costs, and that's how they work. It's not having your own car standing in the street all day. They just share more things. They share their houses, or Airbnb. They share cars. They share everything.
Okay, so better understanding the concept of
Exactly.
being frugal or
Exactly.
financially responsible.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. And thank you so much, gentlemen, for sticking with us. Let me take your response before we went on the break. We're reacting to what Ibrahim said about how best governments can utilize pension funds for critical infrastructure.
Well, I think Mr. Muhanna is absolutely right. It should give a return on the investment. It's not spending money, it's investing money in something which gives back more money than is invested in. So there are great opportunities, by the way, in infrastructure. If you, for example, invest in an airport, which can make lots of money, because if airports are well visited, they make a profit. You can invest, for example, in high-speed internet networks, which is very profitable, and well, you see all these providers making a lot of money. Why should a pension fund not be part of that kind of investment? And if you talk about roads are a little bit old school, but if you have toll roads, you get some money from the people who use that road, and then it gives money to the pension pot, and then you can say, well, you get a return on investment. So I totally agree. Any choice being made about investment in the infrastructural sense should be made very, very wisely.
But you think, would you recommend proper legislation to ensure the safety?
I think
apart
so.
from maybe the already stringent rules of the pension?
Again, if you look at the responsibility of a pension fund or a pension provider, is the trustworthiness of that money, because that's the money brought by many people, and those people shouldn't be, that trust should be supported. So mistrust is the debt for pension funds.
Okay, let's move on. Muhanna, let me come to you. Let's talk about social security systems on the continent. I know you have some strong views, especially around governance. You believe that there is still weak governance in Africa's social security systems. Tell us about that.
In almost all social security systems in the region, the top-notch positions such as the managing director, you call it, or DG, Director General, or MD, all these positions usually are political appointees. And also the board are representing the government, the federation of the employees, or the employers, but the chairman is always appointed by the politically appointed. So having that, I have seen it in an unworking relationship, because the MD feels that I don't answer to the board. I am above the board. I'm appointed by the president of the country. You don't see that in many countries in Europe, or usually the MD is, you have a committee with the board of directors, they have a system of selecting the MD.
So it's an African thing.
And in Africa, you have a problem, in my opinion, the governance of the Social Security. This alone, you have the executive body, which is the managing director and all the directors under him, feel that they please the MD, and then the MD himself wants to protect his position. He doesn't challenge anymore the government because the government appoints him. So these are issues of governance, and I really hope that reforms take place to change that.
Eric, interesting point is made there, and I saw you nodding your head. How do we begin to change this? First of all, your thoughts on this trend that Ibrahim has noticed?
Well, it's true that you should be aware of the transparency of how the system works. If you're part of it, you should be aware who is doing what and who is entitled to do that. And there are upsides and downsides, and I really urge that the downside should be well taken care of, because if you don't, people don't trust the system anymore. So we're talking about trust, and there are more points of trust or distrust or danger in the system. For example, what I mentioned this morning in my speech, if you talk about cybercrime, if you have systems who go online, or which are many systems in social security, but also in the pension industry, the cyber criminals, if they can access the system and they steal your money, then you have a problem. And there's another dangerous point. If you have so many people in a system, you have a lot of big data, and big data means potential problem with privacy. And if you don't respect the privacy of the people, they don't believe in the system anymore. So if the system is not well funded in its way with governance and rules and barriers that the people you don't want them to be in that system, they should be taken away from that.
Okay, let me ask you last question for you. We've seen a lot of reforms on the African continent in pensions. We've seen a couple of success stories, but I know that the big picture should be that the entire continent, gets to a certain level where we can say Africa's pension system is successful. And we know there's a saying that a rising tide lifts all ships. Is that what is going on the continent? Are we having areas where there's success stories and then others are still way back and not catching up?
Well, as long as people earn more money and economy is growing, I'm sure that more people will enroll for a pension system. That's logical, because what you see is that people know that within 20 years they can't rely on their tribal situation or a local situation with a family, and when they're 60, 65 or 70, they have to have some sort of money available. So it's for sure the only thing they have to be aware of in an early stage is that they should start saving as soon as possible, and not start when they're 50, then it's too late.
Okay, would you like to add something to that?
I'd like to add before you on this. One promising thing happening in Africa for the past few years is that most countries are establishing regulatory bodies to supervise social securities.
Okay.
Until recently, social securities were not really supervised. They were attached to the Ministry of Labor or attached to the Ministry of Finance, but they have their own autonomous operations. But nowadays, you see, whether in Tanzania or Uganda or Rwanda, you have regulatory bodies, which is putting guidelines on the investment, on governance, and so on and so forth. So that's very promising, and I envision to see better social security reforms in the region.
Okay, but are you confident? Are you happy with the reforms you've seen so far on the continent?
Not enough. I mean, there are things like I mentioned earlier. What happened in Tanzania, I object.
Okay.
Allowing people to borrow money against their pensions is completely against the concept of pension, of savings. So I think there should be more work on that.
All right, thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. I have been speaking to Eggink, Chairman, World Pension Summit, and of course, Ibrahim Muhanna, Managing Director, Muhanna and Company, and Chairman, Board of Trustees, Muhanna Foundation.